Good.
Lar, how are you, sir? Prashant, good to see you, man.
Hey, Blas,
Hey,
likewise.
Hey,
How are we all doing?
excellent. Hi, Jeannie. Hey, Patrick.
hello.
Hey, everyone. Welcome.
Barry, hey, Mark, Randy.
Hi everyone, hi Matthew.
How's it
Excited
going?
for the session. Oh, yeah.
All right, well, it's a couple minutes after, and we might have a few more join here, but we have about 10, which is nice, and we're recording this so that we can share it online afterwards. As is my deal, I try to get out of the way as quickly as I can. So Matt, you joined a few months back, and in this effort, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about building in-house experts of sorts. And you mentioned your passion and profession of poker, and I know that's a big interest for a lot of people here, and you're kind enough to volunteer your time and expertise. So with that, I'll kind of into the background and let you take it over from here.
All right, so let's get started. So today I'm going to be offering a poker masterclass. So I've titled this "A Game of Skill Disguised as a Game of Chance." So just so I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit about myself and my own poker story. So essentially, I started playing poker around 2007, 2008. I'd played a little bit just for fun before that, but I had no idea what I was doing. I had been working as a strategy consultant for Deloitte, and I decided I was going to go to law school. The only problem was I had no way of making money, and I wanted to go to law school in New York City, a bit of a conflict. Now, I had a friend at that time who had become one of the winningest poker players in the world. So I figured if he could do it, why not me? So I went out and bought a couple poker books, and I got started. I started at very low stakes, playing for $50 at a time or so online. But through the course of law school, as I continued to play, I started to move up and up and kind of got to around the range of playing 2, 4, and 3, 6 games. Those games are essentially like between $400 and $600 buy-in games. Around my second year of law school, I got introduced into sort of the underground world of New York City poker. To those of you who have seen Rounders, it's kind of a lot like that, where you go into some sort of basement kind of thing, and there's a bunch of poker tables set up and everything. Now, but what I quickly realized is that these games, the average player was quite a bit worse than the players I was used to playing online, and they were playing for more money. So this was a great opportunity. So I started playing quite a bit live. Throughout the course of law school, I continued to play both online and these live games, and working my way up the various stakes. That by my third year of law school, I was playing pretty high stakes poker. At that time, what was happening was that while Texas Hold'em was the most popular form of poker, a lot of the high stakes games in New York City were starting to switch to a different game called Pot Limit Omaha. Pot Limit Omaha is almost exactly the same as Texas Hold'em, but instead of getting 2 face down cards, you get 4 face down cards. And this adds a great amount of complexity to the game, as well as a lot of volatility and additional gamble. And those people who like to gamble love this style of poker. So it's becoming really prevalent in the high stakes games. Now, so I had no idea what I was doing in Pot Limit Omaha, but I quickly realized that nobody else had any clue either, and that the majority of the people who were playing were pretty terrible. So I started focusing on Pot Limit Omaha and made that my primary game. After law school, I worked as an attorney for 4 years, about 2.5 years at a big firm in Manhattan and a year and a half at a small firm. But after I'd finish up with work, I often found myself going and playing poker into the wee hours of the morning in high stakes games. I really loved it. After 4 years of practicing law, I decided it wasn't for me, at least not right now, and I made the transition to being a full-time professional poker player. Currently, I play high stakes Pot Limit Omaha, ranging from 510, which is a $1,000 buy-in, up to games as big as 5,100, which is usually a $10,000 or $20,000 buy-in. I also run a business where I train and invest in other professional poker players. So that's kind of my little poker story. So on to the presentation. So we've got a couple goals for today. The first is I'm going to try to introduce you to some high-level theoretical concepts in poker. Second, I want to offer you a couple tools and tricks that you can use if you're playing poker in order to make better decisions, to play more profitably. And third, I'm going to try to offer some lessons that poker has taught me for thinking better in my everyday life. Hopefully things that you can use as well. Okay. So poker could be divided into two steps. The first is all about gathering information and making assumptions. Okay? Then you go into step two, which is about using those assumptions in order to figure out the most profitable strategies and decisions. This is also the framework that I'm going to use for this presentation, focusing first on gathering information and making assumptions, and next on how to use those assumptions to make profitable strategies and decisions. So getting into this gathering information and making assumptions. So the key words here are don't miss a thing. So when you're at the poker table, you want to be like Sherlock Holmes, noticing every little thing, every little detail, everything everyone says, everything everyone does, and putting all of that information together to sort of almost solve the puzzle of what's going on. So use every piece of information available and break that into three different categories. So the first is assess the player. Take a look at the guy. What's he wearing? Does he have a nice watch on? What does he say? Does he explain why he's at the casino? Is he there with a bunch of friends? Is he drinking? How does he handle his chips? Does he stack them really neatly, or are they all messy? Can he do tricks with the chips, which suggests that he probably spends a lot of time at the poker table? You want to be using every one of these pieces of information to start building a profile for how your opponent likely plays and thinks. So at the bottom, I've got sort of three stereotypical poker players. The first is Mark Wahlberg in The Gambler. Now, he's dressed up real nice. He might be going to a club that evening. He's got a drink sitting there on the table. More often than not, these guys are there to gamble and to have fun, and you should expect them to play in accordance with that. You should expect them to be loose, expect them to be aggressive, and having fun, liking the big bluffs, things like that. Our second poker player is an older gentleman, likely retired. He probably plays poker to pass the time as a hobby. These players, more on average, are generally going to be more tight. They're not going to play a lot of hands, sticking mostly to premium hands. They're going to be passive, not bluffing very often, mostly sort of raising and betting only their strong hands, and they're going to be super duper patient. Now, I want to make clear that this is not always true, but you can almost think it like Bayesian probability, where we're starting with base rates. Our base rate is the basic assumptions that we're making based on assessing that player, but we're taking every new piece of information and we're trying to update that profile continuously. Now, for example, I've played with a number of older poker players who play like this, who look like this, who are in fact extremely aggressive and bluff a lot. They actually take advantage of the stereotype among that older players are passive and tight to basically take advantage of the misassumptions that you're making. The third is Phil Ivey, a very famous poker pro, and this is sort of the standard poker pro look. He's got on his hoodie, he's got on his headphones and stuff. He's probably playing with chips at the table, doing little tricks. Now, these types of players are going to be competent, they're going to be playing good hands, and they're going to be playing generally aggressively. Now, the second area that you can look for information is tells. Now, tells are sort of, this is sort of like the big Hollywood area of sort of making tells to being sort of the all that of poker. In truth, I think a better way to think of them is one small piece of the puzzle that you combine with other information to help make assumptions in any one decision. So I'll explain to you why I believe, while tells are valuable, that they're a little overrated. So one of the common things you'll see at a poker table is someone's hand will shake. Now, someone's hand shakes when they're releasing adrenaline. But the question you need to answer is, why are they releasing adrenaline? Is it because they've got a really big hand? Is it because they've got a kind of good hand, but they're worried about losing a big pot to an even bigger hand? Or is it because they're bluffing? You got to figure out what this actual thing means and whether or not it's actually reliable. Does it always mean that, or could it mean other things? If you basically rely on something that can mean multiple things, you'll make a lot of bad decisions. That said, when I am looking, watching another poker player, I'm often looking at their hands and their eyes. These are going to give away the most information. So one example of something that is reasonably useful is when the flop comes, those first three cards come on the board. An opponent who stares at them for a little while is more often than not going to have a very strong hand. The reason is that when you make a good hand, it's usually pretty obvious to you. You don't need to look at the flop for a while. You notice if you flop trips or a really good top pair or something like that. When someone's looking for a while, they're often trying to figure out any type of interaction that they had at the board. Not perfect, but a useful piece of information that you can combine with others to help make informed decisions. The last and by far the most important is observing the way that your opponents play poker. So you can talk about frequencies. How often are they doing things? Are they playing lots of hands pre-flop or very few hands pre-flop? Are they betting and raising a lot or only doing it very infrequently? You can start to do this to understand how are these people likely playing. A second piece of very useful information is bet sizing. Now, professional poker players are very careful to not give away information to their bet sizes, but amateur poker players often give away tremendous amount of information to the likely strength of their hand or their bet size. For example, some amateur poker players will always bet really big when they're bluffing because they want you to fold, and will use smaller or medium-sized bets with their strong hands because they want you to continue. Once you figure that out, you can really use this to take advantage of your opponent and strategy. The last part is probably the most important. This is hands that go to showdown. And when you reach showdown, you get to see what your opponent has. And this will provide you with a massive amount of useful information. You can then basically go back through the hand with this new information of what your opponent had at that time and get to see what decisions they made and be able to kind of get inside their head to why they likely made those decisions. Using this information is going to allow you to start understanding the way that your opponent thinks and to make really, really good assumptions about their general style of play. So once we've gathered all this information, what comes next? So the goals for information gathering is one, to start developing a profile for your opponent's play. So let's talk about first their style and tendencies. So across three different categories. How loose does your opponent play? Do they fold a lot, or do they basically like to call and continue very often? Are they very aggressive or more passive? And are they skilled? Are they a really good player who's thinking really well or not? You can kind of build this general profile. And the cool thing is once you've started to do this, you can start to think about how other players who have a similar profile play different situations and start to apply it to this opponent. So even if I've only played 10 hands with the opponent, I can start to make very educated guesses on how they're likely to play in different situations based upon how other similar players that I've known have approached those types of situations. So this is really, really useful. The second is you start to understand your opponent's thought process and motivation. Now, I have some cool hands that are going to show you this later, but when you can get inside your opponent's head and understand how they think, you can constantly be a step ahead of them. And that is just so, so useful. That's sort of the general assumptions you're making, the general frame. But then you also want to be making assumptions at every decision point at every hand. You want to be asking yourself basically two questions. Given everything that's happened in the hand so far and everything I know about this opponent, what is the likely range of hands that your opponent has in this situation? And two, how are they going to respond with that range to different things that I do? If I bet here, which of those hands are they going to fold? Which are they going to call? Which are they going to raise? When you start getting this, this allows you to apply mathematics to figure out what is the most likely best play in any situation. Well, Blas, we'll have a question section at the end, so I'll hold that until then. So the next part, what I'm going to go into is combinatorics or quantifying assumptions. So just being able to put your opponent on a range of hands is a great start, but as professional poker players, we're able to use mathematics to be far more specific and to actually put numbers around those assumptions. So I'll give you an example. So I'm at a table and I raise pre-flop, and a very tight player who hasn't played a lot of hands and has been passive re-raises me. So I'm going to put him on a range of ace-king, aces, kings, or queens. That's a good start, but we can do better. The truth of it is that the likelihood of an opponent being dealt a pocket pair like aces, kings, or queens is much lower than the likelihood of being dealt an unpaired hand like ace-king. In fact, there are 6 combos or 6 ways of being dealt a hand like aces and 16 ways of being dealt ace-kings. So I can actually realize that this range is made up of almost 50% ace-king in this situation and close to 50% a combination of aces, kings, and queens. And that's really, really important to know. We can then update these assumptions with new information. So let's say the flop comes out and it's queen 7-3. Now we know that one of the queens is on the board and our opponent couldn't have been dealt that queen. This limits the chances that he has queens to 9% and actually raises the chances that he has ace-king to 52%. But with that information, we now know that if I bet in this situation, if I believe my opponent will fold a non-paired hand, he's likely to fold almost 50% of the time all of those ace-king hands. Now, using this, we can often apply mathematics to actually figure out the mathematical best play in any situation. All right, so I've got a quick little hand that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to kind of walk you through, pausing at various points to discuss the hand. Now, this hand involves Phil Hellmuth and another professional poker player named Danny Stern. If you don't know Phil Hellmuth, he's an excellent, well-accomplished poker player. He's also known as the poker brat because he's a brat, and you get to see him lose a big pot here, so that's always fun. So let's get started with that.
Donnie with pocket kings.
Speaking of straddling, Cowboys.
Raised to 3,000. Prahlad. Folds.
Right? It's like, I don't want to play that high. 5 out of the 6 times.
Action over to Phil. Queen. Oh boy, queen.
Get the bleeper ready. 9,000.
A re-raise to 9,000.
Donnie's in a spot where he could make a 4-bet, but he doesn't want to chase Hellmuth out if he's getting out of line. We know Phil's got queens, though, and he'll call just about anything.
Call.
See, this already a big game. Look at that. He just put in $9,000.
That's because there's a straddle on it, Phil. We're not asking for a double straddle, just the one.
Both the straddle and the cooler hand are to blame for the size of this pot.
A juicy pot pre-flop, which comes out Jack 8 king. A set for Stern.
All Donnie needed was for Phil to not flop a set.
Phil checks.
Donnie's in position, so if he bets here, it will look like a continuation bet.
11,000. Phil calls.
I was going to suggest that the king might.
So I'm going to pause real quick just to kind of discuss what's happened so far. We're going to try to look at the hand from the perspective of Phil, the guy in the black hat with pocket queens. Now, Danny opens from an early position with pocket kings, and Phil wakes up with another very big hand in pocket queens, and he re-raises, which is pretty standard. Now, Danny decides to get a little tricky here and just call with his pocket kings. He could have also re-raised. His hand is that strong. Now, from Phil's perspective, what he should notice at this point is that Danny raised from an early position, and he's a good player. Now, because Danny understands the value of position, something we'll discuss a little bit later, you should expect that he's going to have a pretty strong range of hands. He's going to be playing a lot of pocket pairs, a lot of high cards, and then some mix of hands like suited aces and suited connectors. Okay? We then go to the flop. It's King, Jack, 8 rainbow. Not a great flop for Phil's pocket queens. It's not terrible, but anytime you have a high pocket pair, you really don't want to see an overcard because that elevates a whole category of hands to now being better than you, all those kings. On top of that, you don't really want to end up playing a big pot because if you do, by and large, your opponent is going to have you beat. So his queens kind of get relegated to sort of a medium goodish hand. Now, he checks in the situation, which I think is pretty standard, and Danny decides to bet. Now, Phil should immediately start to have an alarm go off in his head for a couple reasons. The first is that Danny's range, the hands that he's likely playing in this situation, hits this board pretty well. You know, he's going to have a lot of kings in his range. He could have pocket jacks. He could have pocket 8s, things like that. But more importantly than that, if Phil tries to get inside Danny's head, he's going to realize that Danny should know that when Phil re-raises pre-flop, Phil's range actually hits this board incredibly well. So Danny likely shouldn't be trying to bluff him all that often. Now, Danny still will likely bluff with some of his best draw hands, things like Queen 10 suited or 10-9 suited or maybe Ace Queen. But by Phil having those 2 queens, by the sort of laws of combinatorics that we were talking before, he's actually blocking those potential bluff combinations that Danny can have. He's making it less likely that Danny's going to have the most likely bluffs that he would use. So immediately an alarm should start going off in Phil's head. That said, his hand is too strong at this point, and I think the call is completely standard.
Bother Phil, but it doesn't appear so.
Jack of hearts on the turn as Stern fills up.
Phil's now drawing dead to someone pulling the fire alarm.
Hellmuth checks.
Phil put Donnie on a jack. Maybe the second one hitting will save him some money. He's trying to figure out how to get max value.
That's 30,000.
So I'll pause real quickly here again. Phil ends up calling this bet, and this I believe to be a big mistake. The reason being is that when Phil checks this flop and then calls, he's basically telling Danny, I've got a pretty good hand. That's the likely thing. And the most likely pretty good hand that Phil's going to have here is a hand like medium pair, a jack. He ends up having in pocket queens, only a hand slightly better than that. But Phil should have a lot of jacks. Now, Danny knows this, and he still decides to bet. So Phil is basically saying to Danny, I got a pretty good hand here. There's a pretty decent chance I've got a jack, and Danny's betting anyway. And while, like we mentioned, Danny's still going to be bluffing with some of his draws, those two queens block a lot of those draw combos. So right now is the time that Phil should really be getting away from his hand.
Guys both have their hands in their mouths, which, when unintentional, is a sign of weakness.
Phil calls.
In Donnie's case, it might actually be a reverse tell. We'll just call 30,000, drawing stone dead.
The river. The 10 of diamonds. Phil checks.
Can't really tell how many that is, the yellows.
About 60.
Do about 60 left.
There's 100K in the pot, and Phil's only got 60K behind. Would probably look stronger if Donnie didn't put Phil all in.
Come on.
There goes Donnie putting Phil all in.
At this point, all
So I'll ruin the ending, which Phil ends up, after talking to himself for a very long period of time, ends up making what I believe to be a very bad call. And I think that, he really should have been getting away from this on the turn, but now on the river, things have gone even worse. When that 10 comes, a hand like ace queen that Danny could have been very likely bluffing with has now become a straight and is beating him. Hands like queen 10 and 10-9, which were also potential bluffs, have now picked up a pair of 10, and it's possible Danny would no longer bluff with them. On top of that, we still have our pocket queens, which really does block them anyway, and having an additional 10 on the board makes it less likely that they had a hand like 10-9 or queen 10 to begin with. So overall, I think Phil makes a lot of mistakes here, specifically not putting his opponent on a range and not thinking about what his own hand will likely look like to his opponent. So we're going to move on to part 2 of the presentation, which is determining the most profitable decision. So we've gathered as much information as we can. We're ready to make our assumptions. How do we turn those assumptions into decisions? So the first thing is profit is everything. When it comes down to the goal of poker, there is only one. That goal is to make the most profitable decision that you possibly can with every single thing that you do at the poker table. Now, this goes beyond just whether or not I should bet or call or whatever in a situation, but goes into situations like, should I even sit down at this table? Which seat should I choose? How many chips should I buy into? If I make a big bluff, should I show my hand to my opponents? You constantly want to be assessing each one of these decisions under the question of, is this decision profitable and why? Being able to explain it. And if you constantly do that, you're going to automatically become a much better poker player because it forces you to reflect on every decision that you make and start understanding the fundamentals of what makes a decision profitable. And my goal after this is to kind of teach you some of those tools or tricks to start understanding what actually makes a hand profitable. All right. So general strategy, and the key word here is adjust. When you're at the poker table, you don't want to be static. You don't want to just have one strategy and always play the same way. You want to be able to constantly adjust, be fluid to the strategies of your opponents and the table basically generally. So we can talk about generally the sort of table dynamics. So on average, how is the table playing? Is the table playing very loose? Everyone's playing lots of hands pre-flop and no one likes to pull post-flop? You want to counter that strategy by doing the opposite. You want to focus on playing tight and only playing very strong hands. You also want to focus on not bluffing. Your opponents are playing loose. They don't want to fold. And as such, a bluff is often not going to be profitable since it's a bet that makes its profit by getting your opponents to fold. Counter that, if your opponent or your table's playing very tight, you want to start loosening up and playing more aggressive. You want to bluff more. You want to sort of take advantage of the fact that your opponents are over folding. Now, you can't take this too far, but it's definitely adjustments that you constantly want to be making. Then beyond that, inside of each actual hand, you want to be making specific adjustments against your individual opponents. So ask yourself the question, what does my opponent do too much of? And then figure out what is the counter strategy that I should be taking against that thing that they either do too much of or don't do enough of. So take an opponent who's too aggressive. They love to bluff. They love betting and raising. So to counter their strategy, we're going to want to start slow play. That means when we make a really strong hand, rather than betting and raising it ourselves, we want to give our opponent a little bit of rope. Let them bet and try to bluff against us, since we know they love to do this. At the same time, when we hit sort of a medium or semi-good hand, we want to generally call our opponent down, knowing that our opponent is bluffing too much in these situations, making these lighter call downs more profitable. Another style of opponent you're constantly going to be up against are opponents who do not like to fold. In fact, the number one fundamental difference between a decent poker player and a bad poker player is that bad poker players cannot fold. They want to see the river. They want to find out what you have. That's kind of the common trait. Now, to adjust against these players who never fold, the adjustment is simple. Bluffs are bets that are profitable because your opponent's folds. If your opponent isn't folding, then don't ever bluff them. Instead, you want to basically be patient. Wait till you have big, strong hands, and you want to be betting for value. We'll discuss what value is later, but it's a strategy that requires a lot of patience and can be frustrating at times, but it's so profitable. The third is, let's say you take an opponent who's very straightforward. They're very passive, and they're generally very tight, meaning they only play strong hands, and they often fold post-flop if they don't make a big hand. So against this opponent who we know is overfolding, we're going to want to take bluff stabs more often. When they show weakness, take a stab at the pot because we know they're going to fold pretty often. Also, when this opponent actually is betting or raising themselves, we should assume they've got a really strong hand. They're a straightforward player and only continue with our strongest hands. So this is how we can constantly adjust to the different styles and strategies of the opponents we're up against. So we'll move a little on to pre-flop. So pre-flop is when you receive those first two cards, okay? And the most important decision that you're going to make at a poker table is whether or not to play those hands to begin with, to even get involved in the pot. A common problem among amateur poker players is they end up playing too many hands pre-flop, and those mistakes early on compound, and they end up in situations where they lose really big pots based on really small decisions at the beginning. They, played a hand for $5, and next thing they know, they're losing $1,000 pot because they got themselves into a terrible situation by playing a bad hand to begin with. So how do we know what hands we should play in different situations? And the way I like to think about it is asking myself, where is my profit going to come from in this hand? How am I going to make money? And this is going to come from three different advantages: card advantage, positional advantage, and skill advantage, and sort of the balance between each of them. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those. So card advantage is all about the relative strength of your hand compared to your opponent. So when we're talking about pre-flop, aces is stronger than queens, which is stronger than pocket fives. Ace king is stronger than ace jack, which is stronger than king jack. There's a sort of pecking order overall to strength. And on average, you want to have hands that are stronger than the range of hands that your opponents are playing in a situation. Now, that's a good start in the way most amateur poker players think about it, but there's also the area of characteristics. In truth, it's not just absolute strength in the hand, but certain hands are better in certain situations. And I'll explain this based on two hands: ace queen offsuited and pocket threes. So ace queen offsuited is really good at making the good one pair hands. It'll make top pair with a good kicker about 33% of the time. And top pair with a good kicker is a pretty strong hand in sort of a heads up, like against one opponent or two opponents. When you start ending up against 4 or 5 opponents, there's just too high a likelihood that someone got lucky and made a hand like 2 pair, trips, or a straight. So the relative strength of just having top pair good kicker goes down substantially. You need better hands than that to start wanting to build big pots in these sort of very multi-way situations. Counter that with pocket threes. Pocket threes is really only good at doing one thing, and that's making trips. When another 3 goes on the board, you get to make a very strong and very disguised hand. But that only happens 12% of the time. Basically, way less often than ace queen is going to make that big hand. Because this only does it so infrequently, but it makes a strong hand when it does, you actually want to be up against a lot of opponents. You want to have a ton of people sort of in the hand. The reason for this is twofold. One, the more people in the hand, the better mathematical odds you're getting of drawing to that trips, of hitting that 12%. Two, when you do hit it, You want lots of people in there to give a better shot that someone else made a pretty good hand and is going to pay you off when you made it. So don't only think about the strength of a hand, but the specific characteristics that make a hand good in a specific situation. And you can even adjust your play pre-flop, your decisions you make to try to craft the specific situations you're looking for given the hand that you have. Second, and equally importantly, card advantage is sort of what amateur players generally think about, but equally importantly is positional advantage. So what positional advantage means is to get to, on the post-flop streets, acting later than your opponents, or ideally last. So on the flop, turn, and river, you want to act later than your other opponents in the hand. The reason for this is twofold. The first is informational advantage. If you get to see what everyone else does before you have to act, that gives you a tremendous amount of information to make better assumptions and better decisions. The second is strategic control of the pot. Now, this is a bit more of a complicated topic that I'm not going to get too much into. Just know that being in position is going to give you more strategic control and allow you to play hands more profitably. The third area is skill advantage, and that's what we're mostly talking about today. Okay? How good are you compared to your opponent at gathering information, making assumptions, and turning those assumptions into good decisions and adjustments? The better you are than your opponent, the less card strength and positional strength that you're going to need, or positional advantage that you're going to need to make a hand profitable. So you can almost think of these things as balancing each other out. The less card advantage you have, the more positional and skill advantage you have in a situation. Vice versa, the more positional advantage you have, the less, and skill advantage you have, the less card advantage you have. So if you're a very good player and you're in position, you can often get away with playing a lot weaker hands. Now, for amateur poker players, you're often going to be at a skill disadvantage. That means that you need to make up for it by concentrating on playing good cards and taking advantage position. You're going to need to utilize those two factors in order to make profitable decisions, or in order to play profitably. So next I'll go on to post-flop play. Now there's a ton of things we could talk about here, but one area I kind of wanted to give you a little bit was heuristics for betting and raising. Why do we bet and raise in a situation? At a poker table, you're often going to hear a lot of different reasons for why people bet. They'll explain to you, I did it because I wanted to find out where I was. I did it for information. I did it because I was scared you would draw out on me or something like that. For a professional poker player, there are only 3 reasons for betting or raising. Okay, and I'm going to go through each of them. 2 of them are fundamental reasons, and 1 is a supplemental, or we call situational reason, that is only used occasionally and in specific situations. So the first one is the value bet. Okay, now a value bet is a bet done with a strong hand with the purpose of building a pot and getting your opponent to put in more money with worse hands. Now, the overwhelming majority of your profit at a poker table is going to come from value bets. It's going to come from making good hands and getting your opponents to put more money in with worse hands. So this is the primary, most important type of betting. The second one we'll go into is the bluff or semi-bluff. Now, this is the most famous type of bet. Now, this is done generally with draws or sometimes with your weaker air hands, depending on what you believe the likelihood that your opponent will fold is. And the sole purpose of this is getting your opponent to fold better hands than your hand. Now, I want to say this is sort of also glamorized, much like tells. In fact, given the way the mathematics of bets work, value bets on average are way more profitable than bluffs are. In fact, when profitable poker players are bluffing, it's generally for one of 2 reasons. One is because they're recognizing that their opponent overfolds in a situation, and they're taking advantage of that doing too much by adjusting to bluff a lot in that situation. The second is that good poker players recognize that other good poker players are going to notice if they're not bluffing, and as such, we're forced to bluff in order to make sure that our opponents will also call our value bets. If I'm not bluffing enough, another good opponent is going to realize this, and they're going to stop calling my value bets. So I bluff essentially to make myself much tougher to play against. One quick sort of note on this is that the profitability of a bluff is going to come from 2 factors. One is what is the percentage time my opponent's going to fold when I bluff, and the second is if they call, how likely is it that I'm going to improve to a better hand than them. This is why draws are often much better bluffing hands than sort of weaker air hands, because even when you're called with a draw, you often have a good chance of still improving to the best hand. As such, you don't need nearly as much fold equity or percentage chance that your opponent folds to make a profitable bet. So generally you want to, unless you find yourself against opponents who are folding way too much, you want to focus your bluffs mostly on these draw type of hands. And the third type of bet is a protection bet. Now, this is something that's used occasionally in specific situations, but by and large, it's not a primary reason for betting. This is a bet generally done with sort of medium good hands that are vulnerable. And the goal of this bet is to get your opponents to fold decent equity. By equity, I mean the percentage chance of your opponent improving to a better hand than yours. A second reason is to basically prevent yourself from getting bluffed when you're in tough situations. I'll give you kind of an example of a situation where you probably protection bet. So imagine we raise pre-flop with pocket eights and we're called by two opponents, and the flop comes out 10-7-3. Now, at this point, our pocket eights is still going to be the best hand reasonably often, but there's a pretty good chance of our opponents having things like ace queen, ace jack, king queen, high cards that actually still have decent equity against us. So given the fact that our hand is rather vulnerable, we still might choose to bet it for the purpose of protection, essentially getting our opponents to fold these hands that have a decent chance of combined improving to a better hand than us. So I'll discuss a little bit. These are generally used sparingly, but a couple situations where you would probably be more inclined to use protection bets. First, out of position versus in position. When you're out of position, like we mentioned before, your playability or the difficulty of playing a hand, particularly a medium strength hand, later on is going to be much tougher. And as such, you're a little bit happier about just taking down the pot right now. Secondly is in multi-way, and this might be the most important place for protection bets. When you have a medium hand, usually the hands that your opponent's going to fold against you on average aren't going to have much equity against your hand. But when you're against a couple of opponents, the combination of those little pieces that each of them are going to fold are going to add up to a lot. So maybe player one has 10% equity and player two has 10% and player three. So combined, they're going to fold 30%, which is decent equity against you. So that's actually much more worthwhile than just getting someone to fold 10% equity, which isn't very important. Third, in big pots, the bigger the more amount of money there is in the center, the more it's worth protecting. Fourth, in tournaments. In tournaments, protection betting becomes really important because of the need to constantly accumulate chips. You want to basically constantly be taking down pots and building up your chip stack. Lastly, in other varieties of poker besides Texas Hold'em, for example, the game I played, Pot Limit Omaha, generally speaking, equities run closer together, which means when I have a medium strength hand, my opponent's weak hands are still going to often have a pretty decent chance of improving to better hands than me. So protection betting becomes more valuable. All right. So another hand here. I love this hand. This one features a guy by the name of Tom Dwan, who was or still is an outstanding online poker player. Now, Tom is sort of known as a mad genius at poker. On one hand, he's brilliant, incredibly good at outthinking his opponents, but he's also crazy, and sometimes you'll see him do some absolutely insane stuff. So we'll go through this, and I'll pause a couple times just to discuss what's happening.
Right, these family folks. Right.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Oh my God.
We have an eight-handed pot.
Bing bang. He's got the whole gang.
You guys want to talk? Who opened this pot that got 7 calls?
Barry can't be comfortable getting so many callers.
A 10 and 2 deuces on the flop.
Peter Eastgate's flopped 3 deuces.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good flop for Barry. Wants to see what's going on.
That's 10,000.
Juan's got 10s with a queen kicker. But he's also got 7 people behind him. And Barry's fired a continuation bet.
Well, that was a Gale Sayers. That was a Gale Sayers. Juan's going to raise to 37,300.
I don't know what he's doing. He's got to know that Barry's really got a hand here. It's possible with 8 players in the hand that somebody has a deuce, like Peter Eastgate. So I don't understand why Juan would raise that much money. But Peter Eastgate seems a little intimidated by the raise.
And he's gonna call.
He just calls. And now what's Barry gonna do with his aces? Barry calls. Turning out to be a very
All right, so I'm going to pause here real quickly. So Barry, who is a very tight but competent poker player, professional poker player, raises from early position. As we mentioned, he's very likely to have very strong hands in this situation. In this, here he has pocket aces, the best possible starting hand. Now he gets called by everyone at the table. Now, aces is still strong even against everyone, but he's not happy about this. There's unfortunately just a high chance that someone is going to outdraw him post-flop. Now the flop comes out 10 deuce deuce. Now this is actually a really good flop for Barry for two reasons. The first is that, not many hands have improved to be better than his pocket aces at this point. Only pocket tens and a deuce are better than him. And in fact, given that there are two deuces on the board and the fact that the two is the least commonly played card overall, there's still a pretty good chance he has the best hand right now. So he decides to go ahead and bet out for value as well as to get some protection. Given so many opponents, he's happy to thin the field, knock some of these guys out a little bit here. Now, Tom, who has queen 10 here, decides to make a rather strange play. And I'll do a little bit to explain why he does this. So Tom recognizes at this point that he probably doesn't have the best hand, so he could consider folding. But instead, he decides he's going to try to turn this into a bluff, recognizing that sometimes Barry might have a hand like ace-king or ace-queen here, and he can bluff him right now, but more open up the possibility of bluffing Barry later on in the hand by pretending that he has a deuce, by repping a deuce, as we call it. Where this gets really interesting is that Peter Eastgate actually has a deuce and calls Tom's raise. And this is really important. See, when Peter calls this raise, he's basically announcing to everyone, I've got a real strong hand. Now, it's possible he could have a hand like pocket queens or pocket kings. The fact that he didn't re-raise pre-flop makes that extremely unlikely. And in fact, the most likely hand he has here is a deuce. Now, what's really important here is that Peter is doing something. He's basically playing his hand face up. It's obvious to these other great professional poker players, Tom and Barry, that it's pretty likely Peter has a deuce here. And that becomes really, really important later in the hand, in that Peter recognizes that Tom and Barry very likely know he has a deuce.
interesting hand.
Yeah. 7 on the turn.
Peter and Barry check. Of the three players, Juan has got the weakest hand.
Yeah. He bets $104,200.
He's got the weakest hand, but the biggest heart. And Peter Eastgate says, well, what's going on here? I got $500,000 in front of me. Do I want to risk it? I question what Juan did on the flop, but right now I think he knows exactly where he's at.
Wow.
Peter Eastgate releases. He thinks, well, Juan could very easily have ace deuce. And I'm not risking all this money. And Juan realized that Peter Eastgate probably had a weak deuce. Now it's up to Barry. Barry realizes that Tom Juan's got quite an imagination, but does he have this much imagination? It's going to cost Barry his whole stack also, because he's not going to just call here. He's going all in. Wow. Back.
So Tom pulls off an incredible bluff here on the turn. Now, why is he able to do this? In fact, it seems a little suicidal. Like I mentioned before, Barry bets into 7 or 8 players. Tom then raises, and after he raises, Peter Yaskett, having seen Barry already bet, Tom raised, decides to call anyway, basically announcing that he's got a very strong hand and likely a deuce here. But what's really important here is that Peter Yaskett with his deuce knows that he's basically announced he has a deuce here. And he knows that the other his two very high thinking opponents know this. So he doesn't think that Tom would ever try to bluff him off on an obvious deuce. Now, this is where Tom is able to outthink his opponent. He does what we call leveling, or goes a step ahead of him, and essentially realizes that Peter would never, ever, ever expect that I would try to bluff him off a deuce here, and it's so obvious that he has a deuce. And that's why he makes this bluff. This goes to the power of being able to get inside your opponent's head and understand how they're thinking so you can get that step ahead of them. And this is a core aspect of being a great poker player. All right. So on to my last slide here. So poker lessons in thinking. So here I've gathered up a couple of different ideas that I had about how concepts in poker or ways of thinking in poker can be used in your everyday life. So the first one I want to talk about is high-level goals plus heuristics. Okay. So in poker, we only have one high-level goal. That high-level goal is all about making the most profitable decision possible. Now, the problem is that when we're actually at the table, we don't have a lot of time to make a decision. We can't fully analyze it and really try to figure out what the most profitable decision is. That's actually how a lot of professional poker players spend a lot of their time away from the table, is reanalyzing hands when they have more time to figure out what the most profitable play is. But at the table, when we have to make a quick decision, we use various heuristics, questions or rules in order to help guide us to what the most likely decisions are. The things I just taught you about value betting, bluffing, and protection are exactly that, heuristics. They guide you to whether or not a bet in a specific situation is likely to be the most profitable choice, but they are far from perfect. And I think the same concept can be used in life, of basically taking the time to think about your specific goals and then designing some heuristics, questions or rules for specific situations that come up frequently so that you can commonly make good decisions or good enough decisions in common situations. So I'll tell you one way I use that in my own life. I love to eat. I love going out to restaurants and I love great food, but I also want to try to, eat reasonably healthy. So one heuristic that I use in my life is that when I'm deciding between various options in a restaurant, rather than trying to pick whichever one I think might be the best or anything, I'm going to say of the ones that seem appealing to me, I'm going to try to choose the most healthy. This is a heuristic I can use in the moment to quickly make decisions that are likely going to sort of align with my goals. They're not going to be perfect, but they're going to be good enough for a situation where I have to make a regular quick decision. Two other heuristics that I really like when making decisions are the questions of, what advice would you give a friend? And secondly, what would you think about this on your deathbed? Now, I particularly like the second one because sometimes when I think about it in the course of a decision, I realize that on my deathbed, I wouldn't care in the slightest. And it makes me almost realize how unimportant some of these decisions are and that they're not worth a lot of my time actually thinking about it. So I think commonly applying these heuristics and these rules can make decision-making in the moment a lot easier and guide you very quickly toward good decisions in unimportant situations. The second area that I think poker is really valuable in terms of thinking is forcing you to assess your certainty in your beliefs. In poker, you've got to constantly put your money where your mouth is. You've got to be willing to bet and put your money into the middle based upon your beliefs. So it's not enough just to believe something. You got to really understand, why do you believe that thing and how sure are you in that belief? Now, a common question, I borrow this from Annie Duke in her excellent book, Thinking in Bets, is how much would I be willing to bet on my belief? And this is something I try to keep in the back of my mind anytime with any of my own personal beliefs. It's a quick, basic way to test yourself to say, why do I believe the thing that I do? What evidence do I have to believe that? And how sure of that? Often I'll find myself talking about something, pause and think about this question and realize I don't really have a very strong evidentiary base to actually believe this thing, that I'm not an expert in this subject, that I really don't know what I'm talking about. So it's a good way to kind of keep you humble and open-minded in your own beliefs. A second aspect of this is thinking in a probability distribution anytime we encounter uncertainty. Particularly, this can be used when thinking about the future. So in poker, I don't put someone on a specific hand. I don't say he's got ace king here. I put him on a range of hands with associated likelihoods to each of those hands. And I'm keeping all of those in my mind. And I think this is a much better way to think about uncertainty. And I think this is going to be applied in really anything related to uncertainty. I'll give you an example. So a lot of my poker friends are very, very into crypto. And if you talk to them, they'll say something like, oh, crypto is going to 1 million. Now, to me, I think that's, even if you truly believe in crypto and you believe that it really is likely, a better way to think about it is to kind of put a couple of different possibilities of what can happen and probability. So maybe a best case scenario, a pretty good case scenario, an average scenario, a kind of bad scenario, and a very bad scenario, and kind of assign probabilities to them so that you can actually accurately weigh, the future. I think this is a much more successful way to kind of think about uncertainty. The next area is expected value and risk. And in my opinion, when you need to make an important decision, using expected value and risk is the best way of weighing various options. So expected value is basically asking yourself, if I were to do this thing or make this decision 1 million times, on average, how well is it going to work out? It basically gives you on average, how good is this option? And this is going to allow you to objectively weigh that against various other options. Now, one of the best ways to do this in your everyday life, and it's not something you can do for most decisions, but when you have an important one, is to use a decision metrics. A decision metrics basically allows you to figure out what the various options you're considering, what are the factors that are important to the decision, and how much should each one be weighted, given how important a factor is, and then give numerical sort of ratings for each of the options in accordance with that. This is going to allow you to get an actual numerical expected value that takes emotion out of the actual decision and helps you really assess these things. For example, last year I was considering going abroad for the winter, and I was considering a couple options. So I created one of these decision matrix to actually evaluate my various options. And I considered them across things like quality of food in a location, weather, safety, and a variety of other factors. And this really helped me in assessing the various options. That said, just because a decision has a higher expected value than another decision doesn't automatically make it better. You also need to consider the risk. Now, this is sort of the idea of, okay, how likely is this thing to go bad? And if it goes bad, how bad could it go? Sometimes just because something has a positive expected value, the risk might not make it worth it. So you might have two decisions, one slightly higher expected value, but much more risky. You may want to choose to avoid that decision because the risk isn't worth the reward. A great tool that I love to use for risk, which I'm sure everyone on this call knows, is the pre-mortem, which is a great way to sort of identify the various risks and understand if things go wrong, how bad could they go? And then the last area, and maybe the most important, is disconnecting the decision from the outcome. When you're playing poker, you're going to constantly make decisions that can often be good decisions that don't work out well. You can get all your money in with the best hand, but still actually, lose because you got unlucky. This is something that's almost constantly in your face. I apologize. There's a ambulance going by, so I'll just hold for a second. Anyway, so yeah, it forces you to disconnect the decision from the outcome, recognizing that, in fact, what happens may not have actually even been the most likely thing to happen, that the quality of decision is entirely based on the information that you were able to gather at the time, the assumptions you were able to make based on that, and then the analysis you do to come to that decision. Now, you can use the outcome to look back and say, did I miss certain things? Did I miss information? Did I make wrong assumptions? But in fact, the outcome and the actual quality decision are entirely separate from one another. A great decision can work out terribly, and a terrible decision can work out amazingly, but that does not change the actual quality of a decision, which is much more about the process. So it looks like we're right on time here. So that is pretty much everything. If you have any questions about the presentation, about poker generally, anything, feel free to ask them now, or you can reach out to me through my email or the Slack channel. I check it pretty frequently. So I'll open it up now to any questions.
It was amazing, man. Yeah, thank you so much. A lot of really in-depth information that I didn't really understand or get before. So thank you for that. I think Lar had one question, and instead of answering mine, why don't we talk about his real quick? I think it was around using software to calculate odds in real time.
Okay, well, I've got sort of a couple questions. So I can mention, so what is a draw type hand? I'll just quickly discuss what that is. So a draw is basically a hand with a high percentage chance of improving to a good hand. Common examples of that are flush draws and straight draws. So let's say the board comes out and it's Queen 7-3 with 2 hearts. If you have 2 hearts in your hand, right now your hand isn't very good. All you might have, you don't have even a pair. But because of those 2 hearts, if another heart comes, you've now made a flush, which is actually a very strong hand. So these draw types of hands are hands that basically right now are not very good, but they have high potential to become a good hand. Another example is a straight draw. So for example, if the board was Queen 6-5 and you had 7-8, now you have 8-7-6-5. Those 4 cards alone aren't worth anything. But if a 9 comes or a 4 comes, you've now made a straight, which is once again a very strong hand. So the second question, so what are your thoughts on using software to calculate odds in real time while playing online poker? Just let the software do the work and perhaps mix up occasionally. So software is a whole big area that we can talk about. There is a lot of software that poker players use, both to help them in the moment, as well as more importantly, to analyze spots after the fact. As far as calculating your odds, that's something that you can do relatively easily. And I don't think this particular type of software is going to provide a tremendous amount of value to a professional poker player. So I guess my overall opinion on this one is that you could add something like this, but it's really not going to help you all that much. What is going to help you more is something, a GTO assistant, which are generally considered illegal to use while you're playing poker, but something like that can actually be extremely helpful. That's going to tell you sort of an idea of what is a good way of playing a hand in any specific situation. But I won't go too much into that. That's a little bit more of a complicated topic. Were there any other questions, or Blas, do you want me to take a look at yours?
I mean, yeah, real quick, I guess the other thing I'd love to learn is, I know a lot of sports use recordings to learn and practice. How does that look in poker? You know, like you showed those 2 videos. Does everyone who played there look at that to learn? You know, obviously the hands are revealed before they know in real time. Yeah, how do you use recordings to learn and practice?
So essentially, I play a mix of, well, I don't play much live poker anymore just with COVID. I play mostly online. Now with online poker, we actually have pieces of software we can use that essentially create a text document for every hand that we play containing all the information that happened in that hand, and then accumulate it within a database, which we can then filter and use to review our hands after the fact. So after a session, I'll often sit down and look through some of the hands that I've played, and I can tag them with, different things and filter and try to figure out how could I have played this hand better? Or if I find a decision I'm not sure of, I'll actually stop and say, okay, how could I have thought about this decision? So that's a really important thing for online play. When it comes to live play, what most poker players will do is keep a notebook and keep some records of what happens on different hands that they'd like to review later that they can then consider. As far as recordings, I mean, these videos and stuff are much more for entertainment value. I think, for example, tournament players will often, after the fact, if they have a common opponent, someone they see regularly in their tournaments, might go and watch a recording that shows the opponent's cards so that they can get a better understanding for how that opponent plays in real time. It's not so much of a thing that I use in cash games.
Matt, I want to be respectful of your time and everyone's time, but sincerely, thanks for carving out this hour for us and giving us a masterclass on poker.
All right. If anyone has any questions, feel free to contact me on Slack. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So yeah, pleasure.
It was awesome. Thanks again, man.
All right. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.